They say that life's like a roll of toilet paper. You're either on a roll or taking a crap from someone else. It's a crude joke, sure, but isn't that how life often feels, especially when trauma hits? Someone wise once said, change your view, change your life. And if that's true, then what happens when trauma clouds that view? Today we're talking about the topic of trauma, not just the massive, unbearable traumas no human should experience, not only the painful separations, job losses, or public humiliations, even those small, sharp comments in a school hallway that sting for decades, all of them matter, and all of them can be transformed. What if I told you that how you experience trauma isn't the end of the story? That your brain, the same one that stores painful memories, can also rewrite the way you feel about them? That today you can learn a tool that presidents, therapists, hypnotherapists, and everyday heroes use to get back on a roll. Trauma feels unfair. It interrupts your sleep, hijacks your nervous system, and leaves you feeling on edge. But what trauma really is a loop. Like a mental video replayed over and over, stuck in high definition. Cognitive science and therapeutic research support this. According to Lynn, Malakataris, Condon, Maxwell and Cleary, 2012, trauma becomes encoded in the brain not just as a memory, but as a pattern of reactivity, a loop that includes emotions, sensations and beliefs. Often outside conscious control, they show that approaches like cognitive hypnotherapy, mindfulness, and acceptance-based treatments can disrupt this cycle by helping clients reprocess how they relate to memory, not just the memory itself. In short, hypnosis, NLP, and neuroscience confirm trauma isn't just what happened, it's how we encode what happened. But the good news, our brains are storytellers and we can edit the script. So if trauma is a story we keep retelling, then healing is learning how to tell it differently. But theory only takes us so far. Let me show you what that actually looks like in real lives, in quiet moments, in people you might never expect. As you know, some traumas no one ever sees, not the ones that scream or scar the skin, but the quiet kinds, the ones that come from being overlooked, underappreciated, forgotten, even as you give the best of yourself. Edmund Halley, yes, that Halley of the comet, knew that kind of pain intimately. He was a brilliant scientist, a sea captain, a thinker ahead of his time, but perhaps the most extraordinary thing he ever did was believe in someone else. It was Halley who visited Isaac Newton in a moment of doubt. Halley who encouraged him, inspired him, funded him. When the Royal Society refused to publish Newton's Principia Mathematica, one of the most important scientific texts in human history, Halley paid for it himself out of his own pocket. And just when you think the world might reward him for that sacrifice, they didn't. Instead of salary, they gave him boxes of unsold copies of a failed book called The History of Fishes. Imagine that. You help birth the laws of motion and they hand you fish. You give light to the world and it forgets your name. But Halley kept going. He kept believing. He suffered the quiet trauma of being unseen, uncredited, underpaid, and yet he didn't stop offering his brilliance. He never lived to see the comet return, but he believed it would, and it did. And when it lit up the sky again, long after he was gone, it carried his name. That is the power of silent endurance. Sometimes trauma doesn't scream, it whispers, you're not enough, you don't matter, and yet you keep going, and that's what Halley did. It lit a fire in the dark, even though the world didn't look up at first. Eventually it did. And let me tell you about John, a Vietnam veteran who came home carrying wounds he couldn't see. Years after the war ended, he might be walking down a quiet street when bam, a car backfires. Suddenly he's not in the present anymore. He's in the jungle, surrounded by gunfire and chaos. His heart races, his breath catches, and he feels frozen, trapped in a moment he can't escape. Even though he's safe, his mind drags him back to the terror over and over again. John described it like this: it's like your brain refuses to let go. You're stuck in time, fighting battles that happened decades ago. That's the harsh truth of flashbacks. They don't just stay in the past. They take you over to your right now. Dave Grossman, a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel and an expert on trauma, has talked to many vets like John who have struggled with these painful flashbacks. What they found was that healing doesn't happen all at once. It's a process. One powerful tool is mindfulness and grounding. Simple techniques like focusing on your breath or feeling your feet on the ground that help you stay anchored in the present when a flashback starts to hit. And of course, support networks are crucial. Talking with other vets and counsellors make you realise you're not alone and that shared understanding can be a lifeline. For many, including Grossman himself, recovery means slowly retraining the brain to respond differently. It's not about erasing the past, but learning to live with it without being controlled by it. Let me take you back to 1978. Stan McChrystal, the future four-star general, had just left the 82nd Airborne and was preparing to enter Special Forces, a man on a mission, focused, driven. But just as he stepped away, something small, seemingly insignificant, sent shockwaves through the community he loved. The Army's top brass decided to ban all non-standard headgear across all units. That included the maroon beret, the symbol of the paratrooper, a piece of cloth, yes, but also pride, identity, brotherhood, and overnight it was gone. To civilians, that might seem like nothing. It's just a hat. But for the soldiers of the 82nd, it was quiet trauma, a stripping of meaning, a decision made by leadership that, however logical, felt cold, distant, and tone-deaf to the people it affected most. And McChrystal noticed that. He felt it. He watched how deeply it wounded morale. That's the thing about trauma. It doesn't always come with blood. Sometimes it comes with silence. It can be a loss of a voice, a loss of meaning, a moment when the world takes something sacred to you and says, that doesn't matter anymore. McChrystal didn't let that moment define him. Instead, he used it. He moved forward, not by pretending it didn't hurt, but by choosing a new perspective. He chose to serve anyway, to believe anyway, to lead with empathy, because he'd seen how small wounds can leave big scars. So if you've ever had something precious dismissed, your passion, your identity, your truth, know this: you're not crazy for feeling hurt. You're human, but you're also powerful because you can reframe that story. You can let it make you softer, not harder, wiser, not bitter. And like McChrystal, you can still move forward. In 1996, reports of black churches being burned across the American South dominated headlines. The nation was outraged. In a heartfelt radio address, President Bill Clinton condemned the fires and recalled his own vivid and painful memories of seeing black churches burned in his home state of Arkansas as a child. The emotional weight of his world stirred the public. A task force was launched. Federal agents were deployed. Congress passed the Church and Arson Prevention Act, and $12 million in emergency funds was approved. Donations poured in. Foreign religious leaders flew to Washington. The moral urgency was global. There was just one problem. Clinton's memory wasn't accurate. No racially motivated church burnings had occurred in Arkansas during his childhood. It wasn't a lie in the malicious sense. It was a story his mind created, because memory doesn't function like a video camera. It functions like a screenwriter. It stitches together feeling and narrative into something that feels true, even if it isn't. And here's the twist: even though the memory was false, the empathy was real. The actions it still inspired, they still mattered. Sometimes we're confronted with something so painful, so morally jarring, that our brain scrambles to make sense of it. We hallucinate clarity. We build bridges to past pain that never happened, but somehow could have. And from that imagined place of hurt, we still rise to act. So yes, your mind can make up a massive story. You can still misremember something entirely, and still you can feel deeply. You can be shocked and choose empathy. You can do the right thing. Because trauma, real or remembered, doesn't just break us, it calls us to become better. Michael Yapko, in his book Suggestions of Abuse, True and False Memories of Childhood Sexual Trauma, 1994, tells us a deeply troubling story about a man haunted by invisible scars from war he never actually fought in. Over more than 20 years of marriage, his wife witnessed many moments and made her believe he was carrying real trauma from Vietnam. One night, he lost control, triggered by something as simple as the sneakers she was wearing. After calming down, he told her a story about being a prisoner of war for 15 days. He said he was a navigator on a carrier base F-4 jet fighter that was shot down and that his Viet Cong captors wore sneakers just like hers. He described the beatings, the humiliation he endured, how they urinated on him, how he strangled a guard to escape. The guard, he said, was wearing the same kind of sneakers. Eventually he sought therapy. He shared every detail, the terror, the pain, the anger, diagnosed with PTSD, severe depression, and extreme guilt. He began treatment, but healing was slow. Less than 3 years later, he ended his troubled life by inhaling carbon monoxide. After his death, his wife tried to get his name added to the state's Vietnam Memorial, insisting he was a casualty of the war. His therapist supported her, writing a letter to back the claim. Only then did the truth come out. He had never been to Vietnam. How could anyone have known? His memories were so vivid and specific that even his therapist never doubted the truth. His wife believed him, and from all evidence, he truly believed it too. Now imagine a different story. A woman in her mid-30s comes to therapy plagued by nightmares, an eating disorder, and troubled relationships, especially with men. She doesn't know what's causing her pain, but slowly memories begin surfacing. Early childhood abuse, vague at first and increasingly detailed and graphic. She recalls horrific acts forced by her parents. Guess, even being burned with cigarettes when she cried out. Her therapist encouraged her to confront her parents. They deny everything. Did those things really happen? Who can say? This case highlights a challenging truth. Memories can feel intensely real and convincing, but that doesn't guarantee they are accurate. Trauma, memory, and belief can intertwine in ways that challenge everything we think we know. Back in the 1980s, many therapists sought hypnosis as a tool to discover hidden abuse memories. However, hypnosis isn't a reliable truth detector, and caution is essential when working with recovered memories. Imagine this, a woman comes to therapy confused about who she is. Her memories feel jumbled, disconnected, like pieces of a puzzle scattered across the floor. She can't make sense of her own story. Milton Erickson invites her to imagine crystal balls, glowing spheres, each holding a memory from her life. Not real objects, but vivid images she sees in her mind. One by one, she explores them. Moments of school, first love, learning, marriage, growing up. As she moves through these crystal balls, something amazing happens. She starts to put her memories back in order. Piece by piece, scene by scene, she reconstructs her life story. Slowly, the fog lifts. She remembers who she really is. It wasn't about creating new memories. It was about finding the right sequence, the narrative thread that ties her experiences together and reveals her true self. Through this process, she regains not just memories but identity. The woman who was lost becomes whole again. Dr. Joe Dispenza breaks trauma down to its roots. It's all chemistry in the brain, especially involving the amygdala and hippocampus. Here's the gist. Your memories first get stored in the hippocampus. When something traumatic happens, chemicals released by the hypothalamus and amygdala kickstart the hippocampus, creating strong neural connections. This locks those memories deep into your brain's network, tying them closely to your emotional state. But here's the tricky part. Every time you remember that trauma, your brain fires off the same chemical mix again. So your body doesn't just remember what happened, it actually relives it physically, emotionally. That's why when we revisit traumatic memories through hypnosis and shift how we see them, it's not just thinking differently, it's feeling differently. We're rewiring the brain and calming the body and healing from the inside out. So how do we actually do that? Here's a simple but powerful tool from John Grinder called the double dissociation technique. Step 1, picture yourself sitting on a couch watching TV. Step 2, now float behind yourself and watch yourself watching TV. Step 3, now float even further back and watch that version of yourself watching the couch potato you. Boom, you've just double disassociated. What does that mean? The trauma is now like something playing on the TV, distant, separate, and way less threatening. And you're free to observe yourself and yourself watching yourself without getting swallowed up by the emotions. Here's some free advice. Lead into healing. Remind yourself of what you love. Anchor yourself in what you're grateful for. That stuff matters more than you think. And don't underestimate your imagination. Use it to create distance, to make space, to let your unconscious mind take over and do the heavy lifting. That's its job. Healing doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it's just a quiet shift, and honestly, that shift can change everything. If you can imagine pain, you can also imagine healing. If you go all in on being a couch potato, you can go all in on living your best life. You are not your trauma. You are not the memory. You are the one who remembers, which means you have the power to rewrite. Trauma is not about what happened. It's about how we encode experience and replay it. Through tools like hypnosis, dissociation, and changing our perspective, healing becomes possible. So what if you chose to think about trauma differently? What if today, right now, you chose to step back, float up, and reframe? You deserve a life that's more than survival. You deserve peace, clarity, and joy. And the first step, change your view, and you'll get to change your life. You've got this.